Good evening, welcome. Welcome to those that are here in person. And by request, we're going to have the class online as well. It'll be a little different than our morning class and our regular daily class online because as our Thursday night get-together always is very interactive and there'll be questions. So those that are watching from wherever you are, first of all, if you can tell us where you're watching from, that's great. And just bear with us as we have somewhat of a discussion as well. And I'll try to tell the camera what it is that we are, that's being asked from the participants. Just wait for another moment till everyone gets settled. They don't have a way to send drinks or refreshments through the camera yet, but at some point they'll be able to. So I imagine maybe 3D printer.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
How are you, Mark? Thank God. But wherever you are watching, live or on the replay, I encourage you to. Okay, I can say hi. The disclaimer was that we're going to talk. Encourage you to get a drink, make yourself comfortable, maybe a snack, and we'll do a little learning. Also, sometimes I do a little translating into Russian from time to time, so bear with us.
I have a question
Yes.
pertaining to last week's class. So, we went over to get married. That kind of puts you on a clean slate for everything. There's a couple other things you can
It
do.
restarts the slate.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's okay. It's a sign of blessing when something spills. It's good.
I'll get my questions. But, yeah, there's a couple of things you can do that restarts the slate, which are clean slate, right? There's also a couple of things where it's if you know what you're doing, but it isn't good, it cuts off your soul, so to speak, from the world to come. That being done.
1 second.
So
If you say that I'm going to do it and then I'll repent afterwards.
yeah, so for instance, I was reading
Yes, I'm going
part of
to
the Torah
something like
about Pesach. Hashem reveals it to Moshe and stuff. It's if you
Don't do any confessions here.
Yeah.
I understand the question. I want to try to answer it. First of all, don't worry about it. It's fine because we're going to change it anyways. It's okay. It's really fine. We didn't change it this morning. It's good. The question that was asked, you're good. The question was asked that we spoke last week about tshuva, repentance or forgiveness from God. And we said that when a person gets married, so he gets forgiven. There's 3 people that get forgiven. The groom gets forgiven on the day of his wedding, the bride. A leader, someone that's appointed to a position of leadership, and a sage. When he gets appointed to being the sage, any sins are forgiven. Alex asked the question that what happens if a person sins and he has in mind? He knows very well that it's wrong, and he says, listen, I'm getting married next week, so let's do a bachelor party today, right? What if someone says that? It doesn't have to be that such an extreme example. Anything, I'm hungry now, let me go eat something not kosher, but tonight I'll just ask God to forgive me. Does that work? So the Talmud says that it doesn't work. A person that says I'm going to sin, and then afterwards I'll just say I'm sorry, the door is closed. It's sorry. It doesn't use the word door closed, but you missed it. It doesn't work. The Chassidus, the Alter Rebbe talks about it, and he says, let's understand this Talmud. Do a bracha. Baruch atah.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu
Melech
melech
haolam.
haolam
Boire, minei,
Minei
Zeynus. And then on the drink,
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam
Shehako,
Shehako
Nihiyah,
Nihiyah.
B'dvarei.
Thank you.
If a person does some kind of sin, right? Imagine you go out and you say, I'm going to beat up my friend. Afterwards, I'll say, I'm sorry. How does your friend feel? Yeah, are you really sorry? So the Talmud says that if a person comes along and says, I'm going to sin now, and then I'll apologize to God later, I'll have a good time on the weekend, and then on Monday I'll go to shul and I'll figure this out. It's not accepted means you're not going to be sincere because you planned this all along. You can't truthfully say, I regret what I did. You don't regret it. You planned this. You planned to say you're going to regret it. You're actually happy that you did it. You had a good time, and now you just want to apologize. Right? И поняли вопрос, да? Если человек говорит, что я буду что-то какой-то грех сделать, потом скажу, что... Да.
Будь хорошим.
Если он так решил с самого начала, то не читает, то есть не принимает его чуву. So, what Chassidus says like this, you have to understand what this means is it's very hard to do tshuva. It's going to be difficult because you're not going to be sincere. But if somehow you got to that level of sincerity, you really regretted it, you're like, listen, it's Yom Kippur. I want to be as spiritual as possible. I actually should have never done that. It's hard to get to that stage because you pre-planned it. But if you get to that stage, if you get to that feeling, and it's real, nothing stops tshuva. There is no act in the world that you could do that tshuva won't work to fix it. Sometimes it's much harder to do tshuva. It's harder to be sincere if you planned on saying, I'm sorry. But if somehow you managed, the term is used, dochak, if you pushed his way through and really, wedged in, then if you mean it, your tshuva will be accepted. Anyways, let's get to today's class. We don't have to. We can talk about last week's. So, first a joke. A new psychiatrist was on his first day on the job, and they take him into the owner takes him into the building, and he shows him around the various rooms and different patients. They come onto the third floor, and they hear someone shouting, Rachel, Rachel, from his room all day, Rachel, Rachel. And the fellow tells this new psychiatrist, well, this person fell in love with a girl named Rachel. He really wanted to marry her. And he begged and begged. It didn't work out. He lost his mind. And since then, he all day, Rachel, Rachel, he wants Rachel. Fine. They keep going. He shows them around. He gets to the fifth floor. And he hears, Rachel, Rachel. And the owner of the place says, he actually married Rachel. Maybe we shouldn't say this on the air. But anyway, okay, just a joke. The following story is probably one of the most dramatic stories in the Torah. I say this often, but I think this one really is one of those stories. And that's about our dear patriarch, Yaakov. Yaakov is the third one, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Last week we learned how he wanted to get the blessings, and he went to get it, but Esau was really mad because he wanted the blessings, and Esau decides he's going to kill him. As a result, Yaakov has to run away. He leaves Israel. You're taking a person who his whole life sat and studied Torah. He doesn't know from the world, doesn't know from the street, doesn't know from all that stuff, and he has to just go. And not just go, but he's going to his uncle, his mother's brother, Lavan is his name, who is a very shrewd, difficult, he's a liar, okay? He's a liar, a cheater, and sorry, he's asking how to get on. Just going to tell him, 1 second, sorry. It's on Rabbi. Okay. Not sure why you can't find it. Sorry if I knocked you guys off Facebook. I didn't mean to. Well, you can't hear me because I'm not on anymore. I'll resume. Okay. So, where was I?
Met his uncle.
Yeah, it was a liar, a cheater, and whatever. And one of the craziest things is, he tells him, could I stay here? He's like, sure, you could stay here. Work for me as a shepherd. Huh?
Yes.
Yeah, but then he says, I want to marry your daughter, Rachel. It's his cousin. Okay, and the secret, people don't know this. All along, everyone knew that Rivka has two sons, Esav and Yaakov and Esav, right? And Rachel has two. I'm sorry, Lavan has two daughters, Leah and Rachel, and they're going to marry each other. Okay, it's Avram's family. They married with relatives. Okay, he comes, he sees Rachel. It's his cousin. He wants to marry her, and the father-in-law usually, at least it used to be this way, the father-in-law gives a dowry. Right? You want to marry my daughter? Please, I'm going to give you money, support, help. He says that you want to marry my daughter? You'll work for me for 7 years, and then you could have her. And he did. Yaakov worked hard. Again, he was a studious guy. It wasn't his personality, it wasn't his type. It's not who he was. Okay? And he's working for 7 years, dreaming of starting a home with Rachel. The wedding happens, and they're finally going to get married. He wakes up in the morning, and he sees it's not Rachel, it's Leah. Okay, they had a big party. The wedding was on a Friday. Friday night, you can't light candles after Shabbos starts, right? You have candles. By the time the party was over, and they went home to consummate the marriage, there was no candles. Lavan stuck in the younger sister. They were twins. The older sister, they were twins. Leah and Rachel. They were married a few minutes. They were born a few minutes apart. They looked, whatever. It's at night. It's dark, and he wakes up. This is not my wife. At least it's not who I thought I was marrying. Turns out I'm married to her, and it's not what I worked for 7 years for. It's not what I planned. What's up? So now Yaakov has two choices. Okay, one choice, he says, "Listen, I never signed up for this. I don't want to marry this girl. Get out." Whether it's a divorce or whatever, but this is not the deal. I was fooled. I was lied. I was cheated to. The other option, he could say, it's a match made in heaven. This is meant to be, and this is what happened. And apologize to Rachel. Your father's a liar, a cheater, a scoundrel, but I'm married. Now, the problem is you can't marry two sisters. Okay? You used to be able to marry more than one wife. But in Torah, there's a law, a rule, you can't marry two sisters while they're both alive. And the reason is one of the reasons, because two wives, they become enemies to each other. It's just the way it works. Don't believe the other stories. Become enemies to each other. They're fighting for the attention, for the. I see that. I think Howard is on. Howard, if you're on, give me a thumbs up or something. So if you can, okay. In any case, so you can't marry your wife's sister while she's alive. So Yaakov has a choice. Either he could say, "Hey, I never signed up to marry Leah." I'll give a recap for the two people that just joined. We learned about Yaakov marrying Rachel. He thought he married Rachel. He wakes up in the morning and his father-in-law fooled him. He sent in Leah. He's stuck. He has choices. He could either tell him, "I worked for 7 years for Rachel. I want Rachel and get Leah out of here," or, which has its own issue because he still can't marry the sister. But anyway, even after a divorce. But the second option, he could say it's Bashart. It comes from heaven. This is the choice that God had intended for me. This is my wife, and that's it. Yaakov takes a third route, and he says, "I'll take Rachel as well." Okay, and it's a very, very strange thing. How is it possible that he's able to do it? Now, it's true that Torah wasn't given yet. Technically speaking, Torah wasn't given yet. So you could say
I didn't.
What? So whatever they're doing is optional. It says Avram, Hashem loved Avram, he keeps my laws. Torah wasn't given yet, but Avram kept everything, even the stuff that are Rabbanan, rabbinic. Avram kept every single mitzvah. And his son Yitzchak did the same, and Yaakov did the same. So you could say maybe before Torah was given, you're allowed to do it, but they did it anyways. They kept all the rules. Yeah.
Ironically, I read an article today from Rabbi, similar topic that brought up that Yaakov marrying his sister. It said one idea was that they weren't born Jewish, so he had to convert all four of his wives. That's like basically being born again.
So
like, in a sense, they weren't sisters in a sense.
very good. So this talk probably that you're getting at, it's actually one of my favorite sikhs of the Rebbe, one of my favorite talks the Rebbe gave. And there's several answers the way you could explain it. You could say it was pre-giving of the Torah. They didn't keep it. That's one answer. It's not a good enough answer because they kept everything anyways, but maybe you could use that as a reason. Because Yaakov kept all the mitzvahs. He wouldn't say, oh, this mitzvah of two sisters, Torah wasn't given me, I'll skip that one. Conveniently, right? Another answer is, like you said, Alex, that when someone converts, they're like a new person. So technically speaking, they're not sisters anymore. That's if you say that it's really a conversion, and even then, the custom is to treat it like family for marriage purposes. Like you can't marry a sibling just because they both converted. There's other things here, but the point is, and let's look when Avram remember he had angels that came over to visit him, the guests. They weren't people, they were angels. But Torah tells us the menu that he gave them. And the menu that he gave them was, first he gave them butter, right? Butter, milk, and then he gave them the meat. There was like the appetizers. They went to shech the animals to prepare the food. They got 3 tongues. That was considered the special meat then, the tongue of an animal. And that's what he gave them. And then, by the time, in other words, he didn't do milk and meat together. You find all these special things about the way Avram kept everything. And all of a sudden, Yaakov is like, Torah wasn't really given. He married 2 sisters. But let's not forget, he's starting a Jewish nation. He knows that. The 12 tribes come from Yaakov. How does it sound? Like, matriarchs. Technically speaking, they really shouldn't be married to the same man. How does this work? Right? Now, the Ramban, Nachmanides, gives an interesting answer, a painful answer actually. But he says that out of Israel, even when Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, our avos, our fathers, they kept all the mitzvahs before it was given, out of Israel, they didn't keep it. When they were in Israel, they kept it. If you left Israel, this whole idea of keeping the Torah before it's given, they didn't do. And he says even further, later we learn that on the way back to Israel, as they got in, Rachel died. Passed away. Because the land could not handle that Yaakov is married to 2 sisters. That's the Ramban's explanation. That's why they're not buried together. Because he's only going to be buried next to one of them. And Leah, he was married to her first. Okay, that's the. I'll tell you more so. A very painful. The Gemara says in Pesachim, Daf Kuf Yutes, page 119 of Tractate Pesachim, Mashiach will come. There's going to be a big meal, and Hashem is going to say, "It's time to eat. After you eat, you have to bench, right? Thank God for the meal, and you do the blessing after the meal is done on a cup of wine. Someone leads the benching. The most prominent person leads the benching. So they're going to ask Avram, first Jew, lead the benching. He's going to say, sorry, I can't do it because I have one son, Yitzchak, another son, Yishmael. I'm not the best candidate for this. So the Yitzchak should do it. Yitzchak says, I can't. I have Yaakov, but I also have Esav. They come to Yaakov, all of his sons were tzaddikim, all 12 tribes, right? And he says, I can't because I was married to two sisters. That's what the Gemara in Pesachim says. So they come to King David, and King David says, yes, I'll do it. So you see that it's looked at as something of, Avram and Yitzchak, you could say, it wasn't their fault. What do you want? Yishmael grew up the way he grew up. Esav grew up the way he grew up. But when it comes to someone like Yishmael, right? I'm sorry, like Yaakov, who married two sisters, he did it with open eyes. He woke up in the morning and he decided, here's my solution. I'm not going to send Leah away. I'm not going to just live with her and that's it. I'm going to go and marry Rachel. How do you do that? Two sisters? Before the Torah was given, it's an answer, but it's not good enough of an answer. Now, so different commentaries explain various different answers. The Rebbe in this talk brings 5 different answers. But I want to share the Rebbe's message, and it's a very powerful lesson for life. And as people get more involved in Jewish life and become more observant and more religious, this is a piece which we have to remember. Okay? Yaakov made a promise. He told this girl, his name is Rachel, he told her, I'm going to marry you. They got engaged. Okay? Your father wants you to work for 7 years, I'm going to work for 7 years. But then I'm going to marry you. Okay? And when you make a promise, you got to keep it. Now, today, if you make a promise that you're going to eat pork, God forbid, not only do you not have to keep it, you're not allowed to keep it, and your promise has no validity because you're making a promise against Torah. But that's against Torah, if Torah was given. But if you decided that you would love to study for 4 hours a day, 5, 10 hours a day, it's a beautiful thing. And you made a promise to your wife, to your whoever, that you're gonna help in the house. Sorry, I want to study Torah. It's good to study Torah, but you don't have to study all 10 hours. But you do have to keep your promise. So Yaakov is faced with a dilemma. Keeping a promise wasn't something unique to Torah. All of the people after the flood of Noah, if you remember, why did the flood happen? Why did God destroy the world? It wasn't because they worshipped idols. It wasn't because of some other thing. It was because among people, interpersonal relationships was bad. They cheated, they lied, they weren't honest. God said, I can't handle this. And after the flood, they accepted upon themselves, we are going to be honest. That wasn't optional. Optional is Torah before it's given. Today, obviously, it's not optional. Today, if somebody promises a girl to marry her, and then he's married to her sister, there's no way around it. Because Torah says it's a biblical command. You can't marry two sisters. We say it's part of what we read on Yom Kippur, in the reading of the Torah in the afternoon by Mincha. There's no way around that. Okay? But the stage that Yaakov was at in history, Torah wasn't given. Yes, he kept it, but it's an extra thing. First, keep the basics. The basics is don't lie. And at that time, he has to stick to it. That's why, by the way, when he woke up in the morning, what does he tell his father-in-law? Why did you fool me? Hey, why did you fool me? Because I'm a liar. Well, his question, why did you fool me, is people don't lie. That's accepted policy. That's behavior of all people. It's not unique to keeping the Torah. Again, today it is. But back then it wasn't something unique to that. By the way, I'll tell you more so. Avram did all the mitzvahs, right? But he didn't get a bris. Until God told him to get a bris, he didn't get a bris. Why not? You kept every single other mitzvah. Even the rabbinic mitzvahs. And bris, you didn't. Why didn't he do bris till then? God didn't tell him. God didn't tell him anything else either. God didn't tell him to keep kosher, right? And the reason is because they accepted upon themselves not to kill. That's one of the things that the people after the flood accepted upon themselves. And and Avram, if he would give himself a bris at the age that he was at, there's a risk involved. You can't risk your life. That's basic. That's not extra Torah, pre-Torah given. So he waited. Once God said that, it became a command. He has to do it. So you see that they kept everything they had to keep before it was given, unless it contradicts something which is a commandment. So you have what you need to do, you have the extra. And in Yiddishkeit, there's a lot of extra. Okay? And you have to make sure that the extra doesn't take precedent over the basic. In Yaakov's context, what was the extra? Keeping Torah. What was the necessity? Be honest. So he said, even though it's going to be the 12 tribes, even though this is the Jewish nation, but I got to keep my word. Rachel dreamed for 7 years about their marriage, right? In her mind, they're going to have a home together, and there's this and that. What's worse than a shattered dream? Sorry, your father this. Well, you're allowed to marry me as well. You can marry more than one wife back then. You can marry 2 sisters, technically, according to Torah. Why not? Go. Well, you see, I'm extra religious. I have this thing. Extra is beautiful, but not if it's on the expense of a lie. The Gemara in Ksubis, Daf Samach Beis, page 62, has a tremendous story. There was a great sage, his name was Rav Rechumi. Once a year, he told his wife, I'll be home Erev Yom Kippur. Before Yom Kippur, I will be home. One year, he's on the roof of the shul, I guess it was hot then, and he's studying Torah, as he did. Study. It's Erev Yom Kippur, and his wife is waiting, finally the day that he's going to come home. She's waiting. He's engrossed in his learning, and he didn't realize the time, the clock, whatever. And the sun set, it's Yom Kippur, and he wasn't home. And she knew. She missed it. She started to cry. The Talmud says that the tear went up to heaven. He actually said she believed so strongly. He said he's coming. It's getting late, but he's going to be here soon. He didn't come. In the end, she said she cried. Her tear reached the heaven, and that shul that he was sitting on, the roof crumbled, and he fell and he died. And the Talmud says, you see how important it is to keep your word? When you say something, you stick to it. Obviously, if it contradicts Torah, you have no choice. Torah comes first. But Yaakov, at his time, it wasn't Torah yet. A couple generations later, it will be. You need to be a mensch, and not in the name of religion do whatever you want. There are certain things you have to do because it's religion. Certain things are just. I'll tell you, the Rebbe and the Rebbitzin, they escaped Nazi Germany. It was actually Nazi France at the time. And it was very, very hard to get a visa. And the previous Rebbe, the Rebbe's father-in-law, was working in America to get him the visa. And it required a lot of connections. It was a crazy time in history. And as they finally was with somebody else, and they got the approval. They have visas to go to the United States. And the fellow that was arranging it, he told the Rebbe, let's go to the post office and we'll send a telegram to your father-in-law that we got the visas for you and your wife. The Rebbe said, yes. But I think the right thing to do, according to the Torah, would be to go home first, let my wife know the news, and then we'll go back to the post office. You got to be a mensch. There's certain things that have to be done. You have to have your priorities straight. It's very important to send a message to your Rebbe and tell him, especially when he's working on it, and thank him. Or there's also a wife that's very worried. And Yaakov had the same thing. He's like, 1 second, there's a girl here who I promised something to. I have to keep that promise. Unfortunately, we live in a time when people say words are words. Even politicians say it. Even. So I said something. Okay, I didn't say I'm going to stick to it. So I said, and we have to learn from Yaakov that words are very important. You say something, you have to follow through. You can't just say stuff. And if you make a commitment, you have to keep the commitment. You know, when people come to heaven, they go out on Shabbos, page 31, says like this. When a soul goes to heaven, they ask several questions. What do you think the first question is? Did you keep Shabbos? Did you keep kosher? Did you pray? It's not the first question. The first question, which shows you on the priority, the first question is, were you honest in your dealings? Afterwards, they want to know if you had times to study Torah. That's number 2. And number 3 is, did you await Mashiach's coming? But the first question is, were you honest in your business dealings?
Specifically business or
No,
in family?
it means interactions.
Instructions, people.
Yeah, I mean, the term is used for business, but it's general.
Yeah.
It means not in your dealings. Were you honest? Were you or not? Because in the moment of truth, that's the question. Okay, there's a great sage that says, Torah came to add to basic humanity, not to exchange it. I just want to be clear. It doesn't mean that we could, in the name of being nice, listen, I'd love to keep Shabbos, but my friend needs some company. I want to be nice. It's friendly. It's polite. You can't just break it because I think it's polite. Or I promised to meet up with him. I didn't realize it was Shabbos. Too bad. Shabbos, it's a law. But there are certain things that you'll come across that they're optional. They're the extra layer. There's a story about a couple that got married. I actually give an introduction to the story. I've said it here in the past. But an introduction to the story, there was a rabbi who had a special custom. He wanted his matzah to be the most strict, kosher, best. There's a lot of kosher matzah, but he wanted his matzah to be the special matzah. And he would bake matzah and provide matzah for the whole community. But he had his batch. It was like really special. Again, everything is kosher. He had his batch, and then he would give their own matzah. Now, one year, it was right before Pesach, a few hours before actually. His wife was busy in the house, last minute preparations and running around. Some guy knocks on the door. I didn't get matzah yet. So she's like, sure. She runs into the rabbi's study. He was busy, he wasn't there. And she took a package, 6 matzahs, and gave it to the guy. Have a nice day. And in her haste, she didn't realize she gave away this special pack of matzah. It's irreplaceable. Pesach is in a few hours. There's nothing you could do about it. What should she do? Her husband will find out what's going to be here. She figured, I'm not going to say anything. I'll put in the regular matzah. It tastes the same. It was baked in the same bakery the next day, the day before. I'll put it in there and whatever. We'll call it a day. He came into his study. He saw the matzah. Whatever. He knew exactly what happened, but kept his mouth shut. And she's nervous like crazy. He comes to the Seder. He knows it's not the matzah. Makes the blessing. He eats it. It's kosher matzah. It's fine. About 6 months before this Passover, a couple got married. And everything was going nicely. But it came Pesach, and she prepares matzah balls. Now, according to the Hasidic custom, we don't mix any liquid with matzah, except on the last day. We don't make matzah balls on Pesach. No liquid with matzah. Matzah is eaten dry. Because in case there's some flour that's not fully baked, which it's really fully baked, but just in case, and you put liquid, the liquid would cause it to rise, and then you have a problem. So the law is you could eat matzah with any liquid you want, enjoy, as long as it was baked. But some people have this strict custom. On one of them, it's the custom that we don't have gebruchts. It's called. We don't have matzah with anything else. Fine. She's in the kitchen making matzo ball soup. Pesach is coming. He walks in. He's like, "Are you out of your mind? What do you mean? You're making matzo ball soup in my house? No way." She's like, "My husband, in my house, Pesach without matzo balls is not Pesach. We're going to have matzo balls." He said, "No way, absolutely not." He said, "I can't. My mother did this every year. You want to tell me that I'm not going to keep it?" He's shouting. She's shouting. They had a seder. He had the food without the matzo balls. She had the matzo balls. She was upset. It was a disaster. The fighting got so intense that he said, "I'm not going to live with you." And the first day of Chol Hamoed, which is the intermediate days of Pesach, and you could write and he schleps her to the rabbi. He actually came himself first. He comes and knocks on the door. "I must speak to the rabbi urgently." "What happened?" "I need a divorce," he says. "Divorce? I need a divorce. Just got married. Oh, I thought everything was going well." She adds matzo ball soup. "I will not have matzo ball soup. In my house, gebrachs, no way. I'm extra religious." He said, "Really? Did she know this in advance? Did she fool you? Did she?" "We never discussed it. This is basic Judaism. I do not have matzah." What does she say? Well, she says that her mother always did it. Her grandmother always did it. She will not be without matzah balls. She needs it. So, "Do me a favor. Have a seat." And he says, "Rebbitzin, come in." And he tells her, "What happened to my matzah? Can you just share with my matzah?" "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, but someone came in. I was rushing. I was so stressed. I didn't notice. I gave the wrong pack. Maybe I should have told you. I didn't want to tell you. I didn't want you to be upset. Pesach, I figured, you'll think it's the same matzah." He's like, "It's perfectly fine. I want you to know that I knew very well it wasn't the right matzah, but I kept my mouth shut. It happens, You didn't mean it, and we can't fix it, right? So this matzah is just kosher. It's meant to be. Don't worry about it at all." And he tells this young man, he says, "Listen, you want to be extra religious and break your marriage. Now, if it was a law, if she was making chametz, God forbid, you got a good argument. You cannot give me chametz. But it's not chametz. It's a Hasidic custom. So custom comes before peace. Custom comes before getting along. Before Yaakov made the similar calculation. He said, "Look, the custom is that my family, we keep the Torah even though we don't have to yet because it wasn't given. The law is, if you promise, you stick to it. I'm not going to use religion and say, me, Yaakov, I do customs. Okay, it's a little lie on the side. We'll call it a day." Unfortunately, people tend to make that mistake. If they pray all day and they keep Shabbos and kosher, okay, cheat a little bit here, cheat a little bit there, they tend to discount it. And it's a big mistake. It's wrong. Torah says you can't lie, you can't cheat. But in their mind, they tend to differentiate. The Talmud says if a person owes money, in certain cases, he can take an oath. He swears in God's name that he doesn't owe them money, or he paid it back, or whatever it is. Well, says, 1 second. Talmud asks a question, logical question. You don't trust this guy, right? You think he's lying because he'll steal money. But when he takes an oath, all of a sudden we trust him. What changed? If he's liable to lie and steal money, so he'll lie and say that he takes an oath. Talmud says just because he's accused to steal money doesn't mean he's accused to swear in God's name. What's the difference? There's no difference, really. But a person's mind, he says, okay, I lie. I told the guy something. But saying God's name in vain, taking an oath, that's a big no-no. We have certain lines they won't cross. And Yaakov said, my line has to be the other way around. What's required? Excuse me. I'll tell you a story. There's a fellow lived in Israel. still lives, thank God. His name is Yaakov. He's one of the only people today that are alive that survived all 6 years under the Nazis and came out walking on 2 feet. His father was a rabbi, and they were living in Poland. And when the Nazis came in, right away they started these rules and whatever. He wanted to get something for the holiday. He was going to go shopping. And his wife told him, listen, you have a beard and payas. You go outside, they're going to catch you in a second. Why don't we send our son? He's not so noticeable with the long payas and the big beard. Send him. So he went to shopping for them. And the moment he walked out of his house, it was the last time he saw his parents. He was taken. First 3 years in the ghetto, and most people died over there. Next 3 years in Auschwitz. Crazy story. I mean, he was on the way. He survived the March of the Living, March of the Death March, as they called it. He actually was in the camp. He took off his clothes already for the gas chamber, and one of the officers said, "Such a young guy, you should go work," and sent him out. In a different time, I forgot what happened, but he was basically beaten, and they hung him by his legs, head down. He lost consciousness. Somebody, doesn't know who, took him off and sent him to the clinic, and he came back to life. But he said that one of the first days he was in the camp, or I don't know, first days, a few years, a Rabbi Frankfurter calls him over, and he tells him that it's his last days. He feels he's not going to make it. He has 2 requests. Promise me, he said, 2 things. Number 1, you're young, you're strong, you'll survive the war. Number 1, that you will tell the world what happened. And number 2, find somebody from my family and give them regards. So he promises. He called a Rabbi Ashkenazi I just saw the other week. He lives in Israel, and he told him, I need your help. I'm in my 90s. I made a promise. The first promise I kept. He's on the board of Yad Vashem in Israel. He dedicated his life to make sure that it doesn't get, that people know about it. But I can't find this Rabbi Frankfurter's family. It sounds like they all perished from the Holocaust. You're Chabad, you know other rabbis all around the world. Try to find. He said it took a long time, but they found I think a grandson. Who did he find? Yeah, a grandson who was living in New York. He's a professor in Touro College. He found him and was able to give him regards. And he said, I kept my word. And I intended to keep my word, so somehow I was protected. It's keeping your word is not to be underestimated. You know, it's small stuff. People say things, whatever, they meant it, they couldn't, they changed their mind. Who said it, didn't promise, you know. Yaakov teaches us this very important lesson. What's law, there's no way around it. What's extra credit, you got to have priorities straight. This Shabbos, tomorrow night, it's a very special Shabbos. It's the birthday and the yard site of the Mittler Rebbe, the second Chabad Rebbe, of Dov Ber. And on Sunday, the 10th of Kislev, actually 10th, is the day when he was released from prison. So these 2 days are very, very auspicious days. He was a person who was so dedicated to teaching Hasidus. His Hasidic teachings are very, very deep, extremely tough. I'll just share a brief story about his birth. The Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, asked his Rebbe, the Maggid of Mizrich, for a blessing to have a child. He had 2 daughters. He wanted a son. And every time he asked him, he wouldn't get an answer. And it bothered him. He knew that if his Rebbe is not answering him, that means he's not getting the blessing. Asking again and again. Finally, without asking, 2 days or 3 days before, a couple days before his Rebbe passed away, He told him, "You want to know how to have a child?" King David says in Tehillim, "Bamei yizaken nar es orchoi," which translates, if you, the deeper meaning is, how do you merit to have a son? Through having guests. The mitzvah of being hospitable gives you that merit. And then he told him, "Don't forget about me," which was his way of telling him to name his son after him. And not even a year later, he had a child. He was no ordinary boy. Later became the second Chabad Rebbe. But he named him Dovber after his teacher. It's a time that we appreciate it even more, the teaching of Chassidus and what it represents, the inner dimension of Torah. We had this discussion earlier today that why do we have Chassidus now? If it's so important, why didn't we have it 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, 400 years ago? Well, the Rebbe says that certain eras require certain infusions of light and inspiration. The time that we live in is a dark time. There's confusion. There is a complete mix of good and bad is so intertwined. And temptation is big. And struggle is real. And the Eibishter, God gave us a special gift of the teachings of Chassidus to be a source of inspiration to help us to be able to do the right thing, to give us a little bit more of light. We should be able to make the right decisions, to overcome the difficulties, to serve Hashem even in a deeper way. It's just up to us to actually learn the Chassidus. And obviously what we learn here is teachings of Chassidus, it's deeper concepts, it's the insight into the Torah teachings. We could have learned this thing just as a story. Yaakov wanted to get married. This happened, and he moved on. He even have a few explanations that he was allowed to because it was before the giving of the Torah. We come and say, listen, life is a little bit more nuanced than that. And the lesson that we have from it. The Rebbe once, the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, he once said, you have to live with the times. Which sounds like you got to be modern. Or you got to be up to date on current events. He didn't understand what it meant. And his brother explained to the Chassidim what Alter Rebbe means, live with the Parsha of the week. That's the time. Every week we learn another Parsha, learn it, get it, and live with it. Because there's lessons in it. It's not a history book. It's not an old story from once upon a time. It's real. It's relevant. It applies to us. Let's leave some time for questions from the audience, person, or online.
What was the relation with Rachel to Ishmael?
What?
Was there a relationship with Rachel with Ishmael?
Okay, so Yishmael is Rachel's uncle. But I mean, Yaakov, through marriage, right? It's Yaakov's uncle. But I want to tell you something very interesting. So I mentioned earlier that they said that Yaakov was going to marry. There's two sons, Yaakov and Esav, right? The older one's Esav. Will marry the older one, which is Leah. The younger one is Yaakov. Will marry the younger one, which is Rachel. Done deal. Now, Leah knew that Esav is a bad guy. Everyone knew. She also knew that she's destined to marry him. What are you going to do? I'm the older cousin, marries the older cousin. So she prayed to Hashem. When Yaakov came to town, he saw that Rachel was very pretty, and Leah's eyes were swollen. Torah says it. Why would he say that about a girl? Imagine you meet someone and you say, your eyes are, it's not a polite comment. And Torah says it, and forever we're learning this. Every child knows that Rachel is described as the pretty one, and Leah's eyes. What's this? The answer is as follows. Leah cried and prayed, I don't want to marry Esau. What do you mean you don't want to marry Esau? It's Bashert. That's intended for you. That's what God decided. But she prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed. And she was able to change her destiny through through prayer. Unfortunately, there was a lot of tears, a lot of crying. It physically changed her look, but it changed the reality. And through a crazy turn of events, a father that's a liar, a cheater, whatever it is, had her go in and marry him, which she didn't even know. But in the end, she was married to him, and she did not have to marry Esau. And she had 6 of the tribes. Shows you the power of prayer. How even when it's predetermined, you can change it. Not easy, but you could change it. One more note. Rachel and Yaakov knew who her father was. And he knew that he's susceptible to pull a fast one. So Yaakov made with Leah certain codes. At night, when we come home after the wedding, it's going to be dark, and your father's not honest. So here's the deal: they had a code, a password. He'll know that it's her. She'll know it's him. And they rehearsed it, and they knew that everything was fine. But when Rachel saw that Leah was about to be taken in instead of her, she said, "Do you imagine the shame she's going to have right now?" Yaakov's going to come out and say, and it's not even her fault. Her father's forcing her. So she gave her the codes, not to shame her sister. Imagine, it's her groom. 7 years she waited. And she knows the law. She's not going to be able to marry him. I mean, obviously he did. But at that moment, she's giving away. And even if she could marry him, she don't want her sister. No wife wants a second wife. But she didn't want her to be embarrassed. Shame. She gets tremendous reward for that, and the greatness that she is, and God hears her prayers. She prays for the Jewish people in a special way. But it's another reminder, another lesson. Thanks for joining online. If you have questions, please put it in the comments. Share, like, subscribe. Tell me where you're watching from. And have a wonderful Shabbos, a wonderful evening. Hope to see you again soon. We're going to continue some questions.
Я не понял. Вот, которая спекла масло был в печи,
Да.
и он рядом побежал, и он готов развиться с женой. Что правильно ответить? Я не понял.
Что когда люди должны жить в хорошем состоянии друг к другу, это мицва. То, что ты хочешь соблюдать, какая-то особая традиция, которая связана с хасидизмом, это очень красиво, если она согласна. Если она не согласна, это же не закон. Бросаешь Тору за традиции, которые связаны с какой-то общиной. Важные, хорошие, красивые традиции, но он обычай или заповедь.
Я знал и видел таких вот евреев в Союзе, которые, когда в печах полотенце, и он каждую ложку, потому что уже бульон с мацой, так он, чтобы моца нет, так он каждый раз вытирал ложку и кушал дальше. Это же каждый...
Да, но он же не развел свою женой за это.
Нет, он не развел, но я от Зайна не шугает.
Ты не шагаешь, но
Вы же не делаете так, когда
я делаю.
вы вытираете.
Я не вытираю. У нас мы сначала кушаем маца, потом убираем совсем мацу полностью. Нет мацу вообще на стол, киши, ничего нет. И потом кушаем на стол.
На пейсах, да?
Да. На сейдер, кроме сейдера, на сейдер же надо постоянно и вино, и мацу, то есть не вместе, но постоянно пользоваться. Но обычные трапезы мы просто уберем полностью.
Да.
How's your Russian?
Really
It's getting better.
Так, и еще.
That's all.
That's all you got. What?
No hablo español.
There you go. International.
Еще.
This one I'll try to translate.
Почему, когда мы говорим ссоры, Ривке, Рохл, Лея, а не Лея Рохл. Вот, и когда мы все говорим и перечисляем, то мы говорим сперва Рохал, а потом Лея.
Okay.
Если минуточку. Потому что настоящая жена у него была все-таки Лея. Я вам сейчас объясню, как я понимаю. Лея похоронена вместе с Яковом, там, где лежит Авром, и там, где лежит его сын и внук. Это первое. Она желала Якова все время. Она его несколько унизила, его Рохов, когда с этими с мандрагорами. Она, что иди к ней, потому что я взяла мандрагоры, хотя это ничего не помогало и так далее. Унизила несколько Якова. И почему все-таки мы говорим,
Let me translate.
мы говорим вначале Ссоры, Ривке, Рохл, Лея. Тем более, что вся история, мы всего в синагоге сегодня вызывали Хоэль, Лея, Леви, опять-таки Лея, Иудей, опять-таки Лея. Все идет от Лея. А вы мне можете сказать, хоть одного, и все колена, как то, что сделал Рохл, все исчезло.
The question in short is why do we say Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah? When we talk about our matriarchs, there's Sarah, Avram's wife, Rivka, which is Yitzchak's wife, and then Rachel, Leah. Leah is older. He's also pointing out that Leah has 6 sons of the tribes, so the Kohanim and the Levim are from her. King David comes from Leah. This is not to be taken lightly. Why do you say Rachel before Leah? First of all, Rachel was no small person either. Rachel was very special. Technically speaking, she is referred to as the Akeres Habayis, the main caretaker of the house, but it's not translated properly. But she's considered to be the one that Yaakov wanted. That's probably why we refer to, I don't know for sure, but I think that's probably why we refer to Rachel before Leah. You're saying she's older. What kind of business is this? Older first.
Leah first.
Right, it should be Leah first.
The first was не слово Leah, Рохл.
A lot to learn.
Нет, да, я вам скажу, у меня все время, знаете, отец как-то привел во время войны, видел одного еврея молодого, и он взял его и привел к себе. Вот тот стоял и не знал, что делать. Он привел его к нам жить. Вот я всегда все время говорил, папа, гигант, сделал такое. А потом я вспомнил, как это так. Почему папа, мама, который он был уверен, что мама не будет против. Понимаете? И мама, вот это было в первую очередь мамин заслуга. Это просто человек жил с нами, и у нас было 3 детей уже, и семья была. Вы знаете, вы плохо знаете, каково было во время войны, как было жить. И вот и у меня было вначале отец, а потом я подумал, когда я взрослел,